Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Inka Vat. An attempted power grab against the new president or an audacious bid to hold his administration to account. Taiwan has been plunged into political strife just as Lai Ching-te starts his first term as president, and crowds in their thousands outside Parliament recalling the Sunflower Movement of 10 years ago protest against what they say are opposition moves to rush through legislative reform. Why the biggest challenges to Lai's leadership appear not to come from across the strait, but much closer to home, and what that means for China as Beijing watches on. Joining us to discuss this are Yuan I, National Chengchi University Institute of International Relations Adjunct Research Fellow, Roger Liu, National Science and Technology Council Research Institute for Democracy, Society and Emerging Technology, Chief Research and Operation Officer, and Wen-Ti Sung, Atlantic Council China Hub Non-Resident Fellow. A very warm welcome to everybody on the show today. Retired US diplomats William Stanton and Stephen Young, who served as de facto ambassadors to Taiwan, joined the Taiwan Bar Association, the Human Rights Association and academics in criticizing legislative reforms brought to the Legislative Yuan by opposition parties on Friday, May 17th, the day before Taiwan's new president was sworn in on Monday. We can see here the scuffles and brawling triggered in Parliament between lawmakers. Critics have raised concerns both over the content of the bills and also accused opposition parties of using their majority to try to rush the three bills through without due legislative process. In a statement signed by Stanton, Young and others, they said the reforms surpass the scope and power of parliamentary authority found in most other constitutional democracies, including allowing for government officials to be jailed simply for asking questions during hearings. No democracy has applied contempt charges to officials discharging duties during the course of regular hearings for merely talking back. The main opposition's parliamentary leader, Chengchi, said the proposals must be cleared by the legislature to, quote, bring the politics of the Republic of China to a higher level to be in line with democratic countries around the world and to allow the sun to shine in. Protesters outside Parliament also have a message.
我觉得在今天这么多人站出来之后，对于这些民意代表是一个非常有力的警告，他们必须要意识到他们的权利是由人民交付的。
Roger, if I can ask you first, so what sort of signal do you think this sends about Lai Ching-te's first 4 years?
I think that's a reflection of the stalemate that DPP will going to have for the following years, because DPP now doesn't have the majority in the legislative yuan. So we are seeing an internal political standoff at its beginning. If this is not dealt with in a good way and continue for the following 4 years, that will create a long-standing standoff between the two parties, between the ruling party and the opposition party, and this is not something that the people in Taiwan love to see, and this is something that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, will definitely use to take advantage of the situation over here.
These are certainly signs of challenges to be overcome by the incoming Lai Ching-te presidency for sure. Internal gridlock is never going to be a positive in terms of increasing effectiveness or efficiency of any government that's trying to run its policy programs. And I think also, of course, Roger sort of touched on this as well. When it comes to, because of Taiwan's international isolation, there are areas of cooperation internationally that may require a certain degree of confidentiality. And of course, I think when it comes to governance, there's always going to be a balance act between confidentiality on the one hand and transparency and accountability on the other. When it comes to sensitive areas like international security cooperation, for example, like, for example, getting international system for military training, for example, issues like that, that may require a certain degree of tact, let's say. And when we are seeing a rebalancing of the balance of power between branches of government in favor of greater legislative oversight, I think it requires quite a high bar in terms of the Lai president. He needs to show the kind of statesmanship to be able to truly build up bipartisan support in order to ensure that a more effective Congress will not mean more gridlock in that sense, or delays for those meaningful areas of cooperation.
Do you share Roger's pessimism, though, that it seems to be sort of obstruction for obstruction or opposition for opposition's sake?
I think President Lai just starting out, so I think let's all try to be cautiously optimistic at this point. Some will emphasize caution. Let's just try to be, for the sake of our mental health, try to emphasize the optimism part of the equation.
Okay. Professor Yuan, let's now turn to China's reaction to the inauguration, to Lai Ching-te's speech, which would have been carefully passed by the PRC. So unsurprisingly, they were not happy. They called Lai a separatist again, and also remarked about the number of times he talked about sovereignty when referring to the ROC, which is a nation, wasn't it? So can you explain to our international audience, why these terms, independence, separatism, are so charged?
I think to their dismay, to Beijing's dismay, I think Beijing, in the first place, they wish to expect some message, some moderated message being conveyed by Lai Ching-te, but to their disappointment. So it didn't happen. I think Lai Ching-te's remarks also surprised many moderate voices inside Taiwan. So one would have to take a real look about the message being conveyed by their official line of responses. Let me quote a few sentences. They said, quote, "The whole address is full of hostility and provocation, lies and deception, and the Taiwan independence stance is even more radical and adventurous, vigorously propagating the so-called sovereignty and independence," and so on and so forth. I think this is a very familiar official line of reasoning, and yet I would suggest the audience to supplant with some different line of reasoning. That is, reading Chinese message and not necessarily from a linear path of reasoning, rather from a more dialectic, meaning that the message, from both ends, conveyed to different layers of audience. So there are rooms for hope, and also the room for maneuver. So I would think that probably next 2 years for both sides of Taiwan Strait needs to rekindle, if not to reestablish a possibility of re-engagement. Something could be learned from the U.S.-Chinese dealing of the last 2 years. They got quarreled, then eventually they reached an agreement. So that's a lesson probably we have to, think.
I wanted to ask you, so what are the signs that you've picked up on? You talked about the hope and room for maneuver. If you could give me any particular examples.
For lacking of a proper channel, I think what matters the most is for two sides must engage one another, all right, regardless of the official hostility.
And you see signs that they are willing to do that?
No, I suspect. But I think eventually that probably the United States would encourage, both sides to re-engage. I think that's something that could be contemplated.
Okay, let's hope so. Roger, so however, in response to Lai's speech, this is an example of a Chinese ambassador. So this is the Chinese ambassador to the UK who said, I quote, "No matter who becomes the leader of Taiwan, it will not change that Taiwan is part of China, let alone change the historical trend of China's reunification." So this seems to be, what should we read from this?
Well, I think apparently China is drawing the red line. China tries to tell the international society and the key players in international politics that no matter what happens, Taiwan belongs to China and is in separate part of China. So
it's not dependent on what Lai Ching-te says or doesn't say in his speech?
No, I don't think they are related, because after especially the third term and the second term of Xi Jinping, he has changed his direction of Taiwan policy. The CCP has changed the Taiwan policy unilaterally. That is, no matter what happens, they are going to do their things in their pace. So now they are trying to bypass DPP, the current ruling government of Taiwan, and reach out to the Taiwanese society directly. They are cultivating and they are nurturing, they are developing what we call the collaborators or the sympathizers of the CCP. And they are working through different channels to the Taiwanese society. So this is what they are doing now. So whatever CCP or whatever DPP or Lai Ching-te says, I don't think it matters a lot to the unilateral policy of the CCP for now.
But wouldn't a more China-friendly leader help?
Well, theoretically, I think that will help, but since we are not in the lab, we are in the real world, some people might use President Ma Ying-jeou as the one example that if he had been elected or people like him, the situation between Taiwan and China would have improved. However, I think the situation has changed now because after 2017, we see the rising tension between U.S. and China reflected in the so-called U.S.-China trade war. And now you can see that U.S. has been launching offensives towards China in all the aspects, including high technology. They have been using the control regimes since 2002 by controlling the performance of the chips of all kinds.
But this is over Taiwan's presidency.
Right, this is over Taiwan's presidency, but that's a perfect reflection of the change of the great power politics. Since we are a small country, so no matter who becomes the president, I don't think that will influence much.
Okay, so at a press conference in April, Wu Jinghao, the Chinese ambassador to Japan, warned against connections between Japan and Taiwan's security, saying if Japan is tied to the chariot trying to split China, Japanese citizens will be dragged into the sea of fire. Japan still sent a delegation to Lai's inauguration, along with the UK, US, Germany, EU and Canada, together with all, of course, of Taiwan's 12 official allies. Now, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken issued a statement saying the US congratulates Dr. Lai Ching-te on his inauguration as Taiwan's 5th democratically elected president and looked forward to working with President Lai to maintain peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. Wen-Ti, let me ask you, let's talk about the language from China, also international reaction to Lai and his presidency, his inauguration, and also maybe about the pressure that China has tried to exert on them.
Yeah, I mean, those language from China's ambassador to Japan, I mean, it's a sign of wolf-warism coming back, perhaps at a moment of particular political sensitivity, given that it's like the day of Lai Ching-te's inauguration speech, for example.
So you don't think it's a trend? It might be just a one-off?
I think there are particularly sensitive occasions under which people may be, including officials, may be tempted to err on the side of caution more than they usually do, for example. So I think that's one sign of that. And of course, there's going to be full court press. I know that the day after Lai Ching-te's inauguration, you open up People's Daily. That's the official, most popular newspaper in China. There's a whole page on page 4 dedicated to the entire speech. There were like 8 or 9 stories, every one of which is a criticism of Lai Ching-te's inaugural address from all different kinds of Chinese ministries, ambassadors, and international friends of China, for example. So definitely full court press internationally. And but I think it's also, you sort of expect that. You expect a bit of fire theory coming out of China. You expect them to be trying to show that they are in a driver's seat. You also see that line earlier when you mentioned that one of the other senior Chinese officials said something about how no matter what Lai says, it's not going to change the grand historical trend of reunification, quote unquote. I think, again, that goes to show, of course, that China want to project at a moment like this, they want to project confidence that they're in driver's seat, as well as project resolve. However, I'm not sure if the rhetoric is entirely helpful there. Not only because wolf warrior language tend to put people off, one thing, but also when they said, no matter who becomes the leader of Taiwan, you will not change, be the argument that Taiwan is part of China or that the broader trend of unification, for example, which is interesting in that during the election campaign for Taiwan's presidency, it's exactly opposite thing that Beijing used to say, that this election of Taiwan's president was a choice between war or peace, and therefore Taiwan's compatriot, you better make the right choice. Here they seem to be saying the opposite thing, and that statement actually echoes what Lai said in his inaugural speech, when Lai said that no amount of accommodation or gestures of goodwill towards Beijing will change Beijing's ultimate geopolitical design towards Taiwan.
Yeah, he asked Taiwanese not to be fooled.
Yeah, so
Right.
this is why sometimes it's really strange coming out of self-contradictory statements coming out of Beijing.
Right. Okay, sort of mixed messages there. Professor Yuan, let me put this one to you. So US senators have proposed a resolution to reject China's mischaracterization of a UN resolution from 1971. They say Beijing's claim of sovereignty over Taiwan based on that resolution is not accepted by the world. US Republican Senator Jim Risch said of its passage, it does not mean the world accepts China's claimed sovereignty over Taiwan. Moreover, the United States' One China policy is not the same as China's One China principle. Chinese leaders know this, but they have spread this propaganda to deny Taiwan's ability to engage with international organizations. This resolution sets the record straight. The United States can and should push back on China's false narratives at every opportunity. Professor Yuan, what does the actual 1971 UN resolutions 2758, I believe, what does it actually say? And, you know, what does it say to us that these US senators think it's so important to push back on this mischaracterization?
I think our generation witnessed that very moment. We consider that was the very darkest moment of our entire life. Of this United Nations, betrayal its ideal, founding idea. You know, expel one of 5 original founding members, Republic China. So that was the very darkest moment. So, however, one need to address the reality that is the very peace, you know, offer a so-called resolution, legal resolution, a restoration of lawful rights of PRC. The only lawful representative, the right, the PRC, to replace ROC as a P5 member, as the so that's the very nature, and also in addition to it, to expel the representative of Chiang Kai-shek's fashion from the place which they unlawfully occupy. So that's exactly our generation resent the statement, resent the very, very you know, loaded term by this you know, United Nations resolution. So this is something, you know, needs to be dealt with. You know, however, one has to also recognize ever since the passage of this resolution, Republic China suffered a great deal from the pattern of misinterpretation, accuracy, and misunderstanding of the UN, you know, resolution. You know, so there has been very limited pushback by United States and that along another international community. I think it's about time because people recognize there are some elements need to be addressed. That is for fearing mostly that this piece of resolution could be utilized as a legal foundation for China to impinge on any international involvement in the so-called peaceful unification. And so this is something detrimental for the well-being of the Taiwan's people and its government. So, but Beijing enjoyed an advantage profoundly. Reference to the Taiwan use within the UN nomenclature, Taiwan, province of China. So this is something very, very common usage of Taiwan's elements within framework of the United Nations. So I think all in all, we welcome such effort. However, we also recognize there's a limit, all right? For instance, DPRK and RK are both members of United Nations. but the war confrontation persists. And the West Germany and the East Germany once enjoyed the dual membership, and they eventually peacefully unify. So let it be open about the issue. Let it be frank to discuss with our friends, our allies about the nature, about the limitation of any effort. All right, to address on the issue.
Okay, Roger, let me come back to the issue of Xi Jinping or the CCP talking about Taiwan's reunification and how that this is inevitable. And he's also said he won't pass it down to future generations. So what do you think, what's your view of the next 4 years, whether Xi Jinping has a plan for Taiwan? What do you expect to happen?
Well, a lot of people are talking about the possible invasion from the CCP and the PLA, but I will be more optimistic about this part.
Are they still talking about that?
Yeah,
Because I thought that had kind of tamped down a little bit.
Right, I think people are still talking about that, but I think the new strategy of the CCP will be a combination of different ways. For example, they used to rely on the traditional carrot and stick, which is the economic benefit and the military power. But now they have added 2 other things. The first one is the net. They are cultivating the nets through different social relations, old ones and new ones that they have developed with Taiwan for the past 40 years or 70 years to create this kind of collaborator alliances here back in Taiwan. And another one that they're creating is the needle, which is the disinformation warfare, the gray zone operations, combining using military forces as a way to push for their political agenda. That means that when they are launching a military operation, actually they are not, rather than really want to attack in Taiwan, they are actually using the military operation as a tool to force the Taiwan politicians to sit on the negotiation tables and agree with the political terms they are going to offer to the Taiwanese side.
Do you believe that they will try to aim to do that within the first term of Lai Ching-te?
It is very hard to say because it depends on a variety of factors. First, the resolution of the U.S. and its allies to show the willingness to protect Taiwan. That's very important. Secondly, the Taiwanese people's will to protect their own countries, and this should be sent clearly to Beijing that most of the people in Taiwan are willing to stand with their countries and their destinies.
Wen-Ti, you've actually talked about a maximum pressure campaign. Tell us more about this.
Right. This is basically what we expect to see coming out of China in the wake of Lai Ching-te's swearing in as Taiwan's new president. You expect the usual toolbox coming out of Beijing as Beijing goes about trying to inflict maximum pressure to shape the terms of future negotiation between the two sides.
So you believe they're trying to go as quickly as possible?
I believe that they will use all the tools at their disposal, I believe. So the usual stuff, rhetorical censure, like we mentioned earlier, from those critiques from Taiwan Affairs Ministry, for example, or Wang Yi, for example, the foreign minister. You also are going to see gray zone security maneuvers, likely in the form of disinformation to sow division inside the society, because a government's ability to consolidate and build consensus internally is going to be a decisive factor that can or may not enable Taiwan to approach Beijing from the position of confidence. That's one other issue. Then you have the typical military brinkmanship. You're going to see lots of military airplanes, warships operating in Taiwan or Taiwan's offshore islands vicinity, all as a way to show that they want to project greater claim over Taiwan's perpetual jurisdictions. These are the usual stuff. Economic sanctions, most likely. I think China's evolving a little bit as well on that front. They tend to be more targeted nowadays, and nowadays, rather than say they outright want to ban specific Taiwanese goods to China, they may use more technical ways to go about it. So they may say, I'm not banning your imports, I am temporarily suspending it over some technical reason that's probably hard to verify either way. In that case, China gets to show toughness, show punishment, but in a way that maintains the automatic built-in off-ramp for themselves whenever they want to come down from that position and lift the temporary suspension. That gives them that flexibility, and I think Taiwan better be prepared for that, as well as learning, Taiwan should learn how to not overreact to every single move that Beijing try to throw at you.
Professor Yuan, very last question. And so also on the US side, China has sanctioned 3 US companies involved in arms sales to Taiwan. They're General Atomics, Aeronautical Systems, General Dynamics, Land Systems, and Boeing. How does this sort of thing, basically stop the ability of Taiwan to get the arms to defend itself?
But I think that China must have learned a great deal by knowing in detail about how to apply the legal measures as a weapon, especially on the dual use nature. So I think the unilateral sanction of one end to the other always will, inflict some unintended consequences. So we'll see what would happen. But in nature, I think all the unilateral posture taken by the great power would no doubt about it, would invoke unintended consequences. I hope that Taiwan will not be the victim, but we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Yes, we will all do that. Thank you so much, Yuan I, Roger Liu, and Wen-Ti Sung for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for Taiwan Plus.
Taiwan Plus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.